The laughter cut through the garden before anyone saw her. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was sharp, clean, practiced. The kind of laugh that already knows it owns the space. Eli felt it before he heard it, like a blade passing close to the skin. The radio sat on the grass beneath a jacaranda tree, its plastic body cracked from years of sun. It crackled softly, fighting the wind, fighting time. An old gospel song pushed through the static, slow and tired but still standing. Eli knelt beside it, his fingers dark with soil, his knees damp from the morning grass. He adjusted the dial carefully, like the sound might break if he rushed it. Music like that deserved patience. It reminded him of mornings when his mother hummed while the world was still quiet, when dignity lived in small things. Eli worked the gardens of the estate the way he did everything else, quietly, without complaint. He trimmed hedges no one noticed until they were wrong, watered roses no one smelled unless they died. He arrived before the sun and left after the shadows stretched long across the marble paths. He spoke when spoken to. He listened when ignored. Years had taught him that silence was safer. The heels clicked before the voice followed, sharp taps against white stone. Every step announced authority. Eli didn't look up at first. He already knew who it was. Everyone did. The young female billionaire stepped onto the patio like she owned not just the estate, but the air above it. Her dress caught the light, her sunglasses hid her eyes. Everything about her was polished, expensive, untouched by dust or sweat. She glanced at the garden like it was a painting she'd already grown bored of. Then she saw the radio. She laughed again, louder this time. "You still listen to that?" Her finger pointed without effort, without kindness. "People like you are always stuck in the past." The words landed heavy, not shouted, not whispered, said just loud enough for others to hear. The garden went still. The breeze paused. The gospel singer's voice cracked in the static like it felt the insult too. Eli froze. For a moment he thought about pretending he didn't hear her. That was usually the safest move. But the silence stretched, eyes turned. Guests on the patio leaned closer, their glasses half raised. Someone lifted a phone. Eli stood slowly, his back straightened inch by inch, like it remembered something his mind tried to forget. He didn't speak. There was nothing he could say that wouldn't be twisted. Silence had always been his armor. The billionaire tilted her head, amused. Her sunglasses reflected him back at himself, a black man in old work clothes, standing in grass that would never be his. "Turn it off," she said, waving her hand like she was brushing away smoke. "This is a modern estate." A few guests laughed, soft laughs, polite laughs, the kind people use when they don't want to be the next target. Eli nodded once. He reached down toward the radio. His fingers hovered over the dial. He'd done this before, many times. Turn it down, turn himself down, make himself smaller so the world stayed comfortable. The radio popped, not static, not music. A voice cut through clean and sharp, filling the space like it had been waiting for permission. "This is WNX Global." Eli's hand trembled. The billionaire's smile stiffened, just for a second. Barely noticeable, but real. "Breaking news regarding the Meridian fortune list," the voice continued, calm and steady. Someone on the patio muttered, "Is this live?" The billionaire took a step forward. "Turn that off," she snapped, louder now. The laugh was gone. But Eli didn't move. He couldn't. His fingers felt locked in place, like the ground itself had grabbed him. He stared at the radio, his heart suddenly pounding so hard it drowned out the rest of the world. The guests leaned in. Phones rose higher. Silence wrapped around the garden, thick and heavy. The radio didn't stutter, didn't crackle. It spoke with confidence, with purpose. Today's update includes significant changes among previously undisclosed stakeholders. The billionaire's jaw tightened. Her heels stopped clicking. Eli swallowed. He had heard WNX Global before. Many nights, alone in the shed, he listened to voices like this talk about markets, mergers, numbers that shaped lives from faraway rooms. He never told anyone. It wasn't their business. It wasn't safe. A breeze moved through the jacaranda branches. Purple petals drifted down, landing on Eli's shoulders like quiet witnesses. The voice on the radio continued. One entry has drawn global attention due to its anonymity and scale. The billionaire reached for a server's arm. Why is this playing here? She whispered sharply. No one answered. Eli felt heat rise in his chest. Fear, confusion, a memory he had locked away long ago pressing against the door. The radio hummed for half a second, then spoke again. Our analysts confirmed the identity behind several legacy trusts, previously thought inactive. Eli's breath caught. The billionaire took another step forward. Her sunglasses slid down just enough to reveal her eyes. They were no longer amused. They were calculating. The guests watched her now, not Eli. The radio paused, just long enough to hurt. And in that pause, everything shifted. The power in the garden bent, just slightly, like a tall tree starting to lean. Eli didn't know what was coming. He only knew the ground beneath his feet felt different, like it was remembering him too, like all the years of being unseen had been leading to this moment without his consent. The voice inhaled, then spoke again. The name will be released following confirmation from international regulators. A sharp breath escaped the billionaire. This is ridiculous, she said too fast. Someone shut that thing off. No one moved. Eli finally lifted his eyes from the radio. He looked at the guests, at the phones, at the woman who had laughed at him minutes earlier. His face showed no triumph, only uncertainty, only the weight of something old and heavy waking up. The gospel song tried to return beneath the broadcast, its melody bleeding through like a heartbeat. The radio held both worlds at once, the past and the present, the humble and the powerful, the buried and the seen. Eli's fingers curled slowly away from the dial. The voice on the radio came back, steady and patient, as if it knew the truth could afford to wait. And in that charged silence, before the name was spoken, before anyone could stop it, one thing became clear. The Gardner was no longer invisible, and whatever truth was about to rise from that radio had roots deeper than anyone on that marble patio was prepared to face. The command came sharp and fast. Turn that off. Now. The billionaire's voice cut through the garden like a switch being flipped. Not loud, just certain. The kind of certainty that expects obedience without question. Eli's fingers tightened around the radio dial. For half a second, the world held its breath. The broadcast was still speaking, still alive, still pushing against the quiet walls built around him for years. But fear rose faster than curiosity. Fear always did. It lived in his shoulders, in his spine, in the way his body remembered consequences before his mind could argue. He twisted the dial down. The voice faded. The clarity dissolved back into static. Then nothing. A few guests laughed, relieved. The billionaire exhaled and smoothed her dress as if the moment had been nothing more than an inconvenience. Conversations restarted. Glasses clinked. Music from inside the house grew louder, replacing the tension like it had never existed. But something had already cracked. Eli felt it as he knelt back down. A quiet fracture deep inside his chest. The kind you don't hear when it happens, but you feel every time you breathe afterward. He picked up his tools and returned to work without being told. He always did. That was how you survived places like this. You didn't linger where you weren't wanted. The rest of the afternoon passed slowly, too slowly. Eli was sent farther from the house, deeper into the back gardens where the sun hit harder and the work grew heavier, pulling old roots, hauling bags of soil, fixing irrigation lines that no one else wanted to touch. No explanation was given. None was needed. He understood the language of quiet punishment well. When he passed the patio again, the billionaire didn't look at him, not once. But when she spoke, her voice carried just far enough. Some people should know their place, she said, lifting her glass. Laughter followed, light, careless. Eli heard it all. He always did. He learned long ago that when you work in silence, you hear everything. The insults people think you're too small to catch. The jokes whispered behind hands. The judgments passed without looking you in the eye. Silence sharpened his hearing. It made him aware of the world's cruelty in ways noise never could. By sunset, his back ached and his hands burned. He packed his tools without complaint and walked toward the shed at the edge of the property. It was old and narrow, with a single bulb that flickered when the wind moved the wires outside. It smelled like oil and dirt and damp wood. To anyone else, it was nothing. To Eli, it was the only place where he could exist without performance. He closed the door behind him and sat down on the small stool by the workbench. The radio waited there, tucked beneath a rag. He hesitated before turning it on, like he was afraid the billionaire's voice might echo even here. When the radio came alive, he leaned closer. The sound filled the shed, soft but steady. News anchors discussing markets, numbers rolling off their tongues like they meant something. Because they did. These were the voices Eli trusted. They spoke without seeing him, without judging his clothes or his hands. They didn't laugh. He listened like it was oxygen. He listened the way thirsty people drink. What no one at the estate knew was that Eli had once been surrounded by voices like these in lecture halls, not sheds. That he had studied economics late into the night by candlelight, when the power was cut and the world was falling apart around him. That he had understood systems before they crushed him. That life took almost everything from him, but it never took his mind. The radio wasn't nostalgia, it was research. He followed patterns, noted names, listened to the pauses between words. He understood how money moved even when people pretended it didn't, how silence could be used to hide more than truth. The irony never escaped him. He was invisible to those who thought they owned the world, yet he understood the world better than they ever would. The days that followed grew heavier. Eli was watched more closely, corrected more harshly. A supervisor snapped at him over nothing. A guest complained that he walked too slowly. Another said he walked too close. There was no right way to exist once the spotlight of disrespect found you. One afternoon, a phone appeared again, this time aimed straight at him as he was being scolded for a hose left slightly out of place. He kept his eyes down. He always did. The clip went online before the sun set. People laughed. Some commented with pity, some with jokes. Most scrolled past. The billionaire's account gained followers that same night. She posted a smiling photo, champagne glass raised, captioned with words about gratitude and hard work. Comments praised her humility, her grace, her leadership. Eli didn't have an account to defend himself. He didn't need one. The truth didn't live there. He kept working. Morning after morning, he arrived before dawn. Evening after evening, he left when the lights inside the house still burned bright. The radio stayed hidden. The silence stayed heavy. But silence has a way of storing energy. One night, the wind rattled the shed harder than usual. Eli turned the radio on low, listening to a late broadcast. The voice was different this time, more urgent, less polished. He sat up straighter. The radio spoke of investigations, of numbers that didn't line up, of names that had stayed buried too long. Eli felt that old pressure return, the same one he'd felt under the jacaranda tree, the sense that something was pushing back. He reached to lower the volume. The radio didn't obey. The sound grew clearer instead, stronger, like it had made a decision of its own. Eli froze. Outside, the estate was quiet, too quiet. Inside the shed, the voice carried weight, not just information, intent. He stood slowly, heart pounding, and stared at the radio like it was alive. This time, there was no billionaire to command him, no guests to laugh, no camera to frame him as less than human. Only truth, waiting to rise. And Eli understood, in that moment, that silence had protected him for years, but it had also been preparing him. Because when truth decides to speak, it does not ask permission. And this time, it was not going to be turned down. The party felt different before it even began. The air carried a sharp edge, like something electric waiting to strike. Cars lined the long driveway, polished black and silver, dropping off men and women in tailored suits and careful smiles. Investors, media faces, people who knew how to clap with their eyes while calculating with their minds. The garden had been dressed up for them. Lights wrapped around trees, white tables set just far enough apart to feel exclusive. Applause floated easily, rehearsed and hollow. Eli worked the edges of it all, as he always did, invisible by design. He moved through the garden with a tray of glasses, his back straight, his face calm. But inside, something restless stirred. The radio sat where he'd left it near the jacaranda tree, hidden behind a low hedge. He hadn't touched it since the night it refused to be quiet. He hadn't told anyone about that night either. Some truths grow stronger when they're left alone. The billionaire stepped into the center of the crowd, radiant and relaxed. Cameras turned toward her like flowers chasing the sun. She lifted her glass and waited for the noise to soften. It did, instantly. Power has a sound. Sometimes it's loud, sometimes it's silence. She smiled, the practiced kind. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice smooth and confident. "This year has been about growth, vision, and trust." Applause rolled through the garden again. Eli paused near the hedge. He didn't know why. Something in his chest told him not to move. Then the radio turned on. No one touched it. At first there was static, soft, curious. People glanced around, confused. The billionaire's smile stayed fixed, but her eyes flickered. Then the static cleared, confirming the largest undisclosed stakeholder in Meridian Holdings. The billionaire's hand tightened around her glass. Eli froze, his breath caught like he'd been punched from the inside. The voice continued, calm and precise, operating through legacy trusts and anonymous channels. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Investors leaned in. Phones came out, not raised yet, just ready. Eli felt the ground tilt beneath him. His mind raced backward through years he'd buried. Numbers scribbled in notebooks, names memorized, choices that cost him everything. Is Elijah Monroe? Silence detonated, not the gentle kind, the violent kind, the kind that knocks the air out of your lungs. Every head turned. Eli felt it before he saw it, the weight of attention pressing into his skin. He stood there, frozen, tray shaking in his hands. The billionaire laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "That's impossible," she said too quickly. "There must be some mistake." The radio didn't respond to her tone. It responded to truth. Former financial prodigy, the voice continued. Forced out after corporate fraud he refused to commit. Assets hidden to survive. Returns compounding quietly for decades. Eli's knees weakened. He set the tray down before it fell. He hadn't planned this, hadn't imagined it. He had made peace with being forgotten, with living small, with safety over recognition. The radio finished gently, almost respectfully. Net worth exceeds $3.1 billion. The billionaire's glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the stone. The sound echoed. Phones rose higher now, not to mock, not to laugh, to capture, to confirm, to witness. Eli stood there breathing hard. His heart pounded so loud he thought others could hear it. He didn't smile, didn't speak. Pride and anger both felt wrong in his mouth. What he felt instead was something quieter. Release. Security looked around, unsure who they were meant to protect now. Guests whispered. Names were repeated under breath. Elijah Monroe. Elijah Monroe. Like saying it might make it real. The billionaire stared at him, not past him, not above him, at him. For the first time, her eyes held no humor, no dismissal, only shock, and something else, recognition. Eli met her gaze. He didn't glare, didn't bow. He simply stood as he was, a man who had been ignored for too long. The voice on the radio faded back into static and then silence. But the silence didn't swallow the moment. It framed it, held it up for everyone to see. A reporter stepped forward. "Mr. Monroe, The name sounded strange in the garden, too formal, too heavy. "Can you confirm this?" Eli opened his mouth, then closed it. He wasn't ready to speak. Some truths take time to rise all the way. The billionaire finally moved. She took a step toward him, her heels unsteady for the first time. Her voice came out low. "Why didn't you say anything?" Eli's eyes didn't leave hers. "You never asked," he said softly. The words landed harder than any accusation. Around them, the party had stopped pretending. Investors whispered into phones. Media faces glowed with excitement. The garden no longer belonged to her. She looked around like someone waking from a dream. The estate, the people, the power she thought was solid. She saw it now for what it was. Temporary, borrowed, fragile. Eli bent down and picked up the broken glass carefully, his fingers steady. Old habits die hard. When he straightened again, he was still just a man in work clothes. But the way people saw him had changed forever. The gardener had never been small. He had simply been buried. And as the cameras rolled and the whispers grew louder, one truth settled into the air, heavy and undeniable. You can silence a man. You can bury him. But you can't erase who he is. Not forever. The apology did not come in front of cameras. It did not come with a microphone or a press release. It came quietly, the way real moments often do, when there is no audience left to impress. It was late afternoon when the billionaire found Eli near the far edge of the garden, where the trees grew uneven and the grass wasn't trimmed for show. The party had ended hours ago. The guests were gone. The laughter had dried up like spilled champagne. What remained was silence, honest and uncomfortable. She stood a few feet away from him, unsure how close was too close now. Her posture was different, smaller. The confidence that once floated around her like perfume now felt heavy, restrained. "I didn't know," she whispered. Her voice shook, not dramatically, not enough to draw sympathy, just enough to tell the truth. Eli looked at her for a long moment. He didn't rush to answer. He had spent a lifetime being rushed past. This time he let the silence breathe. Then he nodded once. "You didn't ask." The words were simple, calm, not sharp. And somehow that made them cut deeper than anger ever could. She swallowed. Her eyes dropped to the ground beneath her heels. Marble paths didn't look the same when you realized how many hands had cleaned them without thanks. "I'm sorry," she said, "for what I said, for how I treated you." Eli listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't forgive on command. Forgiveness wasn't a switch. It was a process, one he had earned the right to take slowly. "I don't want your house," he said finally. "I don't want your title. And I don't want revenge." She looked up, confused. "I want respect," he continued. "For me, for the people who work here, for anyone you don't look at long enough to learn their name." The billionaire nodded, tears gathering but not falling. She understood, finally, that money could buy silence, but it couldn't buy dignity back once it was taken. The change did not happen overnight. It started awkwardly. She corrected a guest the next time someone made a joke about staff. Her voice cracked when she did it. People noticed. Some smiled politely. Some rolled their eyes. But she didn't laugh it off this time. She funded education programs quietly at first. No banners, no speeches, scholarships for workers' children, training programs for people who had never been invited into rooms where decisions were made. She began asking names, not because it looked good, because she knew what it felt like not to know them. Her pride didn't disappear. It softened, bent instead of broke. She still had power, still had wealth, still had influence. But now, she understood the cost of carrying it without care. Not because she lost power, but because she learned what it had been crushing beneath it. Eli noticed the changes from a distance. He wasn't drawn back into the center of things. He didn't want to be. Some people confuse visibility with freedom. Eli knew better. One morning, before the sun rose, he packed his tools neatly for the last time. He left them clean, organized, just as he'd found them years ago. He didn't leave a note. He didn't need to. He paused by the shed. The radio sat on the workbench, silent now. He touched it once, lightly, then left it there. He didn't need it anymore. The world knew his name now, but more importantly, he knew his own worth without a broadcast to confirm it. He walked out through the side gate as the sky began to lighten. No applause followed him, no cameras, just the sound of gravel under his shoes and birds waking up in the trees. His story, though, stayed. It stayed with the workers who stood a little straighter after that, with the ones who realized that silence didn't mean emptiness, with the ones who understood that knowledge doesn't always wear a suit. The world often confuses silence with ignorance. It confuses uniforms with worth. It confuses labor with limitation. And power makes its greatest mistake when it believes quiet people have nothing to say. Because the quiet ones are always listening. They are always learning. They are always watching the patterns others ignore. And one day, without warning, without permission, their voice will rise. Clear, steady, impossible to turn down. And when it does, the world will have no choice but to listen.